Through 3.5 verses in 45 minutes. But I talked to quite a few people afterwards, and they said they absolutely loved the lesson and the conversations and the exchange of ideas. And so we're going to continue that. What we were talking about is the 6 things God hates, and the 7th being an abomination. And we'll review what we talked about. The first one being in verse 17. A proud look, or haughty eyes, as some translation says. A lying tongue. And one of the things that we talked about is how this world is wrapped up into dishonesty. Mo brought up an interesting point last week after services. This is something that we sometimes don't think about is, is it lying when you only give half the truth? Yeah, or you're not, you're not telling the full story. Okay? Meaning that, it could be misleading. An example Mo gave was that saw somebody from the church in the liquor store. Oh, was that okay? I didn't know if he made it up or not. But he's delivering potato chips. So, you got to tell the full story, or people are going to get the wrong idea. And that was a great example. You have to tell half-truths are not right. It needs to be the full truth. Like they say, the whole truth, nothing but truth, so help you God. That type of thing. Hands that shed innocent blood. We talked about that at great length. Anger out of control, as well as the lack of regard for the value of human life, has made murder a common occurrence in this land of ours. We talked about how many murders occurred in the year 2017. It was over 17,000 in the United States. Unbelievable. Unbelievable. We also talked about a heart that devises wicked imaginations. Premeditated, purposed. Willful wrong is from a heart rebellious to God. Number 5, we got to feet that are swift in running to evil or mischief. This describes a person who will commit wrong whenever he thinks he can get away with it, or he can get something for nothing. And we looked at a couple of verses on that. False witness that speaks lies. Perjury injures the innocent while it protects the guilty. We see that in Exodus 20 and 16. Perjury has often got a lot of people in trouble, hasn't it? If you always tell the truth, you never remember what you had to say because the truth doesn't change. One of the things that struck a chord with me, and I've been thinking about this, is Wayne made a comment about how, and help me out here if I get this a little bit wrong, or not quite what you said. People often blame God for the things that are going on in this world. It's why are you letting this happen? Okay? It's not God, it's evil in this world. It's evil that's causing people to do these things. I looked up a quote, and I couldn't remember exactly who said it, and as it turns out, there may be 2 or 3 people who said it, but it goes like this: the only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is that good men do nothing. Comment. Right. He's not causing them. Yes. Mary. That's a hard question to answer. It truly is. And usually whatever you say is not going to ease the pain that that person is going to. What I have said in the past personally is that God has a plan. We sometimes don't understand this plan. It makes no sense to us. But he has a plan and he is in charge. And then I just say, for example, maybe God is doing this now to protect that child later on from something more horrible. I don't know. It's just speculation. Anybody else have any thoughts on how you would talk to somebody about that? Or Serena? Yeah. And that's really the only way to get through something like that is just to believe with all your heart that God has a plan why this is happening. And again, we may not know it, we may not ever know it until we get to heaven and say, God, why did this happen? But we have to put our trust and faith in the Almighty. We talked about also how family values have crumbled and disintegrated in society today. Jason and I was talking about this a little bit, about kids who come from broken homes, maybe single parents. And a lot of this trouble that we're having, I think, in the world today, especially in the USA, is because of that family structure broken down. Janet, I believe, talked about how back in the 50s and 60s and stuff like that, on Sunday morning about 9:30, you saw all these cars backing out of the driveway one time. Men had suits and coat and tie or whatever, and they were all going to church, all to worship God. I mentioned that the thing I remember the most is we didn't play sports on Sunday. No Little League, no soccer games. Stores were hardly open at all. Maybe a gas station, drugstore for medicine for emergencies, yeah. But only one, or, maybe the town only had one too. But look at how things have changed. I mean, it's gone, I'm just going to tell you, it's gone down the toilet. You have commercials on TV today that show homosexuals, lesbians. I don't want to see that. But they force it and ram it down your throat. And we need to bring God back into the picture. John F. Kennedy in his inaugural address said a famous quote, and people will remember this. He said, "Ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country." Now, if you take that same thinking process and substitute country for God, you can ask yourselves, ask not what God can do for you, but what can we do for God? And that's a question that we need to answer and ask ourselves every day. What have we done for God today? And until we get more Christians and more people of faith to push back on society where it's going, it's just going to keep spiraling downward. And I'm afraid that, pretty soon God's going to have, I've had enough of this. Any comments, thoughts? I want to share a story that Janet told me afterwards, too. This is a great story, and I hope I don't mess this up. Her dad was a very good baseball player. June King was his name. And he actually signed a baseball contract to play for the Cardinals. And when he went to meet the manager, Branch Rickey, he told Branch Rickey, he said, "I really want to play baseball. I love it." He was good at it. He said, "But one thing," he says, "I can't play baseball on Sunday." And Branch Rickey says, well, why not? And her dad said, because I go to church. And Branch Rickey said, that's okay. I go to church too. What a great standing up for what you believe in. It brings a tear to my eye when I think about it. So anyway, any other thoughts? Patricia. Yeah? Yeah. What's in it for me? And you got to understand how far we have degraded from what our founding fathers said about this USA that we live in. I wrote down a couple of quotes. And if you want to see some interesting reading, look up on Google, just founding fathers' famous religious quotes. George Washington says it is impossible to rightly govern a nation without God and the Bible. He knew. Theodore Roosevelt said a thorough knowledge of the Bible is worth more than a college education. He knew. Benjamin Franklin said, as to Jesus of Nazareth, my opinion of whom you particularly desire, I think the systems of morals and his religion as he left them to us, the best the world ever saw or is likely to see. What has happened? Where have we turned and gone wrong? Congress. We all know how Congress is. U.S. House Judiciary Committee, 1854. Had the people during the Revolution had a suspicion of any attempt to war against Christianity, that revolution would have been strangled in its cradle. In this age, there can be no substitute for Christianity. That was the religion of the founders of the Republic, and they expected it to remain the religion of their descendants. It's fascinating to read what our founding fathers really wanted for us. And even as late as Ronald Reagan, who I admired as a president. Without God, there is no virtue because there's no prompting of the conscience. And without God, democracy will not and cannot long endure. If we ever forget that we are one nation under God, then we will be a nation gone under. How true. How true. And the last one of his that I'd like to share with you, I believe with all my heart that standing up for America means standing up for the God who has so blessed our land. We need God's help to guide our nation through stormy seas. But we can't expect him to protect America in a crisis if we just leave him over on the shelf in our day-to-day living. We need him in our daily lives. Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan said that. So I don't know. I don't have the answer except we have to get God back into the picture. You know, never miss an opportunity to share that with people. And we need to have families teaching our kids because they are the future. Any other thoughts or comments? Yes. Wayne? Not a respecter. Yeah. True.
When you're dealing with grieving parents over a child,
Nothing you say.
sometimes just comfort them. Don't try to explain why. The other thing, however, is that we need to remember that God has said that children are in a protected status. And sometimes the most comfort you can give to a parent is to tell them that that child is in God's care. No matter whether it's here or he or she is here or he or she leaves this earth, they're going to be with God. And that's about the only kind of comfort you can give. But I found from experience, sometimes you don't comfort them.
Yeah.
Try to explain.
Yeah, no, good point. Galen?
Many times, people listen to their friends. Think of what happened to Job. He didn't listen to his friends.
Right.
He listened to
God. Yeah. Yeah. Very true. Any other comments? Yes. Thank you. Yeah, what a great way to look at tragedy when it strikes like that. Perfect. Jason? Right. Good. Good point. Any other comments? Jack?
I think it's probably easier a child's loss for Christians to understand than for non-Christians. I know that a very difficult time when we had here, and I would say this when Chuck and Jerry lost CJ. Such a hard thing, but knowing even at that time, the gospel was able to be spread because of what they went through.
Yeah.
Their faith carried them through, and it went to others.
Whether the desire to see their children again makes them, yeah, makes them want to be more Christ-like and everything they possibly can. Because we're going to know people in heaven. So, you know, I like what Wayne said, maybe less is better sometimes, but comfort them. And I agree about a Christian. I think it's a little easier because they have the hope and faith of God that sometime they will see their kids again. Yes, Mary Lee. Right. You've been there. Yeah. No, that's excellent. Other comments? All right, let's look at the. Oh, yes. Yeah. Yeah. It's the loss of a loved one, somebody. I think about the funeral that we all, I said we all, Jason and Serena and the kids and Patricia and I went to last Friday, Bill Gillespie up in Murphy's. He lost his wife in 85. In 86, one of his sons died. In 2002, his other son died. I mean, and the son that worked for the post office was a freak accident. I don't know the details of the others, but can you imagine? Wife, 2 sons, it's terrible. And he was faithful as could be. He had hope. Yes, Jason. Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Okay, let's get to the last part of verse 19, the seventh one, if you will, which is an abomination, and that is one who sows discord among brethren. What does that word abomination mean? Well, yes, it's an extreme disgust or hatred that God does. I mean, this can't get higher. One who sows discord among the brethren. I'm sure, if you've been around the church long enough, you've been in situations where you've seen that happen in congregations. And it just tears people up. A lot of people have had hard feelings and left because of that. What does God want us to do? Doesn't He want us to live in harmony, to love one another? Okay? By contrast, the devil wants harmony and unity destroyed. Let's read Romans 16, verses 17 and 18. Paul writes, "Now I urge you, brethren, note those who cause division and offenses, contrary to the doctrine which you have learned, and avoid them. For those who are such do not serve our Lord Jesus Christ, but their own belly, and by smooth words and flattering speech deceive the hearts of the simple." Where will those people end up? In the lake of fire. In the lake of fire. What are you supposed to do? And by the way, Galatians 5 and 19 through 21 says that, where they will be going to. How do you react to somebody who is doing such a thing? Yeah. Yeah. You go to that person once, and then twice, and then you have nothing to do with them, the Bible tells us. No. No. Retaliation does not serve any good purpose. Might make you feel good at the time, but it is not the right thing to do.
By that I mean, the person is publicly sowing discord. You don't do the same thing publicly. In other words, you don't chastise that person.
Right. Right, yeah. Yeah. Exactly. Absolutely. Yeah. He would not receive them. Right. Yeah. It goes back to do not think more highly of yourself than, you should. Any other comments? Okay. The rest of the chapter, 20 through 35, deals with the subject of adultery again. Much of what we've already covered in chapter 5. Would someone please read verses 20 through 22 for me, please? First three verses. 20 through 22, first three verses.
My son, observe the commandments of your fathers, and do not forsake the teaching of your mother. Bind them continually on your heart, tie them around your neck. When you walk about, they will guide you. When you sleep, they will watch over you. And when you awake, they will talk to you.
Now, these words should sound familiar to you because we've seen similar passages like that in verses. Solomon is essentially saying, listen to the advice of your parents. This is a repeat admonition in chapter 1, verses 8 and 9. So, again, repetition. This is how serious Solomon takes this subject. Verse 23, for the commandment is a lamp, and the law is light. Reproofs are of instruction are the way of life. Solomon here is talking about the illumination of God's word. Illumination is the last of three important steps taken by God in communicating his word to us. First step was the revelation which occurred when God spoke to the Bible authors. Okay? Second step was inspiration. That process whereby God guided them in correctly writing or uttering his message. But now a third step is needed to provide understanding for men and women as they hear God's revealed and inspired message. This vital step is illumination, that divine process whereby God causes the written revelation to be understood by the human heart. Does that make sense? Be able to understand it, to illuminate it, so that we can see it. Notice in the last part of verse 23, it says, reproofs of instruction are the way of life. God's commandments and his reproofs are not intended to remove fun from life. They're not. People think that, don't they? Oh, I can't do this. Why can't you guys have all the fun? You're out doing this and that. But instead, what they provide is a true light to illuminate the path of being successful in living, having that wisdom. It's important. Any thoughts on just about the illumination aspect of this? Ben? We can do it better. Yeah. Right. They don't see that. And you're absolutely right. Right. You know, what's that old saying? If it ain't broke, don't fix it. I mean, you know, it worked for a long time. And anyway, thoughts or other comments on that? Okay. Verse 24 through 26. Someone please read that. Yeah. We have again read and studied words similar to these in the previous chapter, just recently. Psalmist says, guard your heart from lust. If one so much as gives an opening by lusting after a woman who is not his wife, he will be easily ensnared by her sweet words and alluring beauty. Immorality may seem to be appealing, but count the cost, because it ultimately reduces one to poverty. An example here, a man is reduced to a crust of bread or a loaf of bread. That's how far down a person can fall. Any thoughts? Okay. Notice in first part of verse 25. Do not lust after her beauty in your heart. These words push the sin of adultery back to the heart of a sinner, even as does the New Testament. Read with me over in Matthew 5 and 28, please. Matthew 5 and 28. Says this, but I say to you, Jesus speaking here, that whoever looks at a woman to lust after her has already committed adultery with her in his heart. We see similar words to this in Mark 7:21 and James 1:14 through 15 conveys the same thought. Doesn't actually have to be the deed, if you will, but just lusting, wanting, desiring can be comparable to actually committing the sin. We have to guard our hearts from that. Let's look at verse 27 through 29. Can a man take fire to his bosom and his clothes not be burned? Can one walk on hot coals and his feet not be snared? So is he who goes into his neighbor's wife. Whoever touches her shall not be innocent. Now these questions are rhetorical, okay? Meaning the answer is obvious. I like what the NIV says about the one verse. It says, can a man scoop fire into his lap without his clothes being burned? No, and I would recommend you don't try that at home. The answer is obvious. Verse 29, Solomon says, he who seduces his neighbor's wife is going to be punished. Going to be punished. When we read 30 through 35, the last few verses here, the last 6 verses, it deals with the fact that immorality will not be overlooked. Okay? Solomon gives the example of the thief stealing food. Let's read that together. It says, beginning in verse 30, people do not despise a thief if he steals to satisfy himself when he is starving. Yet, when he is found, he must restore sevenfold. He may have to give up all the substance of his house. Whoever commits adultery with a woman lacks understanding. He who does so destroys his own soul. Wounds and dishonor he will get, and his reproach will not be wiped away. For jealousy is the husband's fury. Therefore he will not spare in the day of vengeance. He will accept no recompense, nor will he be appeased, though you give many gifts. Solomon gives that example of the thief stealing food because he's starving in verse 31. It says, when he is found, he must restore sevenfold. Does this mean he has to give back 7 times what he stole? No, and here's the reason why. This does not necessarily mean 7 times the amount stolen, but a full and complete restitution. Okay? What does that number 7 represent in the Bible? Remember the, the perfect number, okay? A complete number. So what we're talking about is restoring what is taken by sevenfold. In verse 32, person who commits adultery destroys himself. He lacks understanding. He destroys his own soul. And then in 34, the jealous husband will not rest nor accept any bribe until he has satisfied his rage of vengeance. Pretty explicit. Any thoughts on chapter 6 that we just finished? Okay, we're going to go ahead. That's right. That's right. Yeah. Well, chapter 7. Oh, yes. John. Yeah. It is a sad situation. Yes. Yes. The one he committed with and his own. Absolutely. Other comments? Okay, well, chapter 7. Just when you thought we were done with adultery, the entire chapter 7 is on this subject. Chapter 7 describes the ways of an adulteress, contrasting with Proverbs 8, which we'll get to probably next week, which sets forth the ways of wisdom. What's interesting about chapter 7, it features an eyewitness account, if you will, of the seduction of a young man by an adulteress. Okay? This is the longest and most elaborate description of the adulteress in the Bible. The fearful destruction which adultery causes does not allow Solomon to abandon this theme, this warning, even though it has been previously, we talked about it quite a bit, talked about and discussed. Someone please read beginning when chapter 7, verses 1 through 5. Yeah, thank you. Now, the first 3 verses that was read should sound familiar because, again, we have already seen and studied these words almost exactly the way that it's written. Solomon's saying, keep God's law as the most important object before your eyes. Notice in verse 2, it says, and my law as the apple of your eye. What does it mean to be the apple of someone's eye? Special. precious. Does anybody have a different word in your translation for the word apple? Pupil. And again, if you think about that, that would fit because your eyesight, your pupil, is very precious. It requires intense care, okay? You don't want nothing to happen. So this is fitting. You'll see that same expression, apple of your eye, in Psalm 17 and 8 and Deuteronomy 32 and 10. Again, in verse 3, Solomon says, bind them on your fingers, write them on the tablet of your heart. Whatever you do, do not forget these instructions. I know I sound like a broken record up here hammering this home, but this is what Solomon is doing. We have to. You know, Mary made a comment a few weeks back about, are we teaching our kids this? You remember that? And I said, well, I certainly hope we are. But is this the birds and the bees type instruction to our kids? You know, when we tell them that the stork delivers the babies and all that kind of stuff. This is not a birds and the bees conversation. This is a conversation you have at whatever age you think is appropriate for your child of the dangers of the real world, if you will. And you have to be, I think, pretty forthcoming in the way you talk about it. You may be even using some of this literature as your guidelines. It's important. Yeah. 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 Oh, yeah. Yeah. Well, yeah, absolutely. I mean, even at school, when appropriate attire is worn by a girl, I never said a word to her. I called for the female campus supervisor to come up, and she took care of it. She knew exactly why she was called in. Because if you say something to her, oh, you're staring at me, you know, and then that opens up a can of worms you don't want to deal with. Yes, Mary. Yeah. 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 Oh, yeah. Yeah. You know, this is a very in-depth problem. I mean, other comments before we close? Maybe a few minutes. Yes, Wayne. Yeah, very good. Exactly, too. Thank you very much, everybody.